Hi, so we're two members of the Update. I'm Patricia.
And I'm Ella.
And so we'll be asking you a few questions about yourself. If you wanted to introduce yourself a bit beforehand, or we can just jump straight to the questions.
Oh, I can introduce myself. My name is Janine Rogan. I live in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I am a passionate educator on closing the wealth gap.
Great. Well, thank you. So first of all, we were just wondering what inspired you to kind of be involved in all this financial literacy and all that?
Yeah, so I think always been interested in financial literacy and money, but where I really started to see the difference was as I was getting my accounting designation. What I was finding is I was auditing and working with some of the biggest companies in Canada, but nobody was teaching us about money. So some of the managers I worked with had no idea how to invest, and that really struck me as odd, because if accountants don't know anything about money and how to invest and how to build wealth, then what does that say for kind of like regular people? And then kind of as time went on, what I really started to notice was a discrepancy between men and women, and kind of the conversations that were happening around women and their ability to build wealth. A lot of my generation was told, you can't buy lattes every day or you won't be able to retire, or avocado toast is why my generation can't afford houses. And I really just felt like if that was the case, we would have figured it out. And so that is kind of what led me down the research rabbit hole for my book, and really helped me understand what challenges women actually face when it comes to investing and building their wealth.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I was reading a bit about you, and I read that during one of your jobs in a company where you were teaching, specifically a man to do your own job, and then you realized at some point that the man was being paid more than you, even though they were a trainee and you were not.
Yes.
How sort of did you feel in that sort of time?
Yeah, it was really disheartening at the time because I was training him to do the same job as me. But looking back, I think I'm really grateful that he shared that with me, because without knowing that information, I never would have been able to advocate for a salary that was, equal, if not higher than his. Where I was thinking, so I was making $57,000 a year at the time, and he was making 70. And I was going into negotiations for like our annual performance reviews, and I was thinking like 65 would be a great number to land on. Like if I could get 65, I'll be really proud of myself. But then knowing that he made 70 made me shoot even higher. So I think kind of after the fact, I would say I was grateful to him, but in the moment, it's hard not to be angry.
Thank you. And so what would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about building wealth and all that?
Yeah, so I think specifically there's a lot of conversation around women aren't good with money, or there's sometimes laughing off, oh, I'm just not good at math, ha ha ha. And I think that does a big disservice to women getting involved in their finances and getting involved in investing. I would also say that from an investing and building wealth perspective, you don't need a lot of money to get started. I think a lot of people believe you need hundreds of thousands of dollars, but the fact of the matter is you can usually get started with under $1,000, sometimes even as small as $25. And that can really set you up. Like if you're 18 or 19 and going into university and you're able to start investing $100 or $200 a month, you could probably retire on that in, the 40 years from that point. So there is power to having time on your side when it comes to building wealth.
Great, thank you.
Do you have any advice for anyone who is navigating financial stress, and what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think, kind of post-pandemic is really interesting because different areas in the world have done different things. And so some countries are facing really high inflation and challenges when it comes to kind of keeping wages up with where they need to be to have, I guess, an affordable lifestyle. So I would say to people that, when you're stressed out about money, usually I would say it's not your fault. And to understand kind of the circumstances that you're in and what you might be able to do about that. When it comes to being overwhelmed with kind of what to do, if it feels like there's 100 things that you need to do and you don't know which one to start with, I would say that even just picking a really small one or committing to a really small one for 1 month is kind of doing that next right step. You don't have to do them all at the same time. And if you commit to doing one every single month, I mean, the math is pretty simple. You'll do 12 in a year. And then you're 12 steps closer to kind of becoming financially independent. So I would say breaking it down into those more digestible steps as opposed to trying to dive into the deep end.
Great. And so similar to that in a way, would you say, like, how can someone balance kind of financial discipline and kind of putting that, like, those like 200 a month to the side and at the same time enjoying their life at the present and still giving themselves something like a present or something that to feel like they're achieving something in the process?
I often liken money to kind of a diet in a sense. We don't want to get to the point where we're just only saving or restricting to the point where we're not able to enjoy anything. If we look at the food culture and the industry around that, usually that ends up to like binge eating or cheat days. And I think the same can be true for money. So if you actually include in your budget some money for fun, I think that allows you to enjoy it guilt-free. And that gives you more balance and more kind of sustainability when it comes to actually building that long-term wealth. And then when it comes to putting that money away, I usually encourage people to just automate it and set it up for kind of like the first day after they get paid so that you don't really think about that money. And if you're only able to do $50 at first, you're only able to do $50. And then maybe you get a raise at work and you're able to increase that to $100 and then $200. So I think you don't, again, have to do all of the things right off the bat. You can kind of go slowly.
Thank you. How have you sort of built this way of teaching finance as sort of an approachable thing and an inclusive one that can be enjoyable to do?
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of it was taking the shame away from usually women who I work with feel really bad that they didn't know these things or that they didn't get started earlier or they made a mistake and went with someone who charged them a lot of money for a service. So it's kind of helping those women understand that they made the best decision they could with the information they had at the time. And, you know, when we know better, we do better. So giving that education to them really helps them see how they're able to build wealth and how to get started, but also giving them the grace that, you know, we weren't taught this stuff in school. There's not a lot of schools or even university programs that teach these things to men or women. So giving them that permission as well.
Great, thank you. And so now a bit about your book, The Pink Tax. Yeah. So kind of, was there something specific that inspired you to do it, or was it just kind of raising awareness and all that, or you were like, okay, now I'm going to write the book because this is kind of the time that I want to do it or something?
Yeah, so I think kind of in conjunction with the lattes and the avocado toast, I really felt like some of the conversations in the personal finance space around women building wealth were focused on, again, always keeping as much money as you possibly can and never spending anything, and I didn't feel like that would be a great life. But also that women, you know, bought too many shoes or handbags or whatever it was, and that's why we didn't have money. And I was like, I really don't think that that can be the answer, because I believe women are very smart. If that was the answer, we would have figured it out. So that's really what led me down the research rabbit hole for like, what are all the systems in place that actually challenge women when it comes to building their wealth?
Cool. And so bringing it more to sort of education and sort of our school here, in fact, what sort of role do you think parents, teachers, and students as well should play in trying to teach finance to students in high school before they leave?
I mean, ideally, every high school would have like a financial literacy curriculum kind of all the way through. The challenge with that is some of the parents also weren't taught these things, and the same goes for the teachers. So you really need to kind of reskill and retool your educators so that they have the skill sets to actually teach the kids that are coming through these schools. So, you know, bringing in speakers or training teachers is something that I think would be a great thing to do for organizations, instead of just, here's a financial literacy curriculum, I'm going to throw it at this teacher or this parent or these kids, and there isn't that support available for questions that they might have.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. And so in terms of kind of your experience so far, like do you have any specific like success stories that you have in mind of someone that kind of managed to apply your methods or your I guess, tips or anything, and are now have transformed their financial life in a way?
Yeah, I work with a lot of women who have, never started investing before, or individuals that are coming out of a divorce where they've kind of let their partner manage their finances, and watching those women kind of, I guess, watching the light bulb go off in their heads and understanding the actual power and financial independence that they can have is, really wonderful for me to see. There was a woman who, I think I also allow women to have the permission to live life kind of on their own terms. So this woman that I was working with, she really didn't want to buy a house. And I think society, at least in Canada, really focuses on homeownership as kind of a wealth building metric or tool. And, through one of the courses she took with me, she ended up deciding to continue renting and travel to Brazil to see her son. And I was like, wow, that is, such an incredible thing to be able to do, as opposed to kind of waiting until she was retired to be able to make those choices.
Mm-hmm. And just for today, what do you want the students, when you're going to go and present to us in actually about 45 minutes, what do you hope the students will take out of your presentation?
Oh, I mean, the list is long on the things that I hope you guys take away, but I think from the perspective of the young women in the room, I want them to understand, obviously, the challenges that they face so that they can be advocates for change and for equality. But I think there's also a big position or I guess there's a big role to play, sorry, that's the right word, a big role to play for the men in the room too. And I think young men oftentimes don't think that it impacts them. And so I think it's really important that they take away how they can actually be better allies and how they can help closing things like the wealth gap and the wage gap.
And so just on what you just said, would you say, for example, that in your case, it's beneficial all the time for when certain men, I guess, perceive that they are being paid more than others in their workplace? Is it always advantageous when they speak up, or is it sometimes maybe a bad thing, or is there any disadvantages to that as well?
I think there's probably a misconception that it's going to be a bad thing, but I have never seen a man come forward and say, this is how much I'm making, and then be like, well, we're going to actually pay you less now and pay you in alignment with the women. I don't think that happens very often. And I think when we look at equality and we look at equity, we have to remember that it's not a finite pie. There is more to go around. There are more seats at the table. Having more diversity in C-suite roles or higher up positions on boards means kind of better things for the organization and for the people that work for the organization. So I think there is only benefits, but part of it is convincing kind of the other side that is the case.
Okay. Well,
thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I think we're out of time, unfortunately.